Welcome to episode 14 of the Wake and Wander podcast. Let's kick things off and have some fun with some reader mail. Got some emails to go through here. Joel in Virginia says, "Hey Will, I loved episode 13 and I agree the airlines are sleazy for overcharging solo passengers, but can you really blame them for the bailout during the pandemic? Without it, they would have gone out of business and there would be no more travel." Appreciate the kind words, Joel. I encourage you to look into this a little more. While the bailout was specifically to keep employees employed by the airlines, despite the lack of people flying, we did see a great reduction in the number of employees at the airlines. Many employees were given some of that money to actually retire, so they reduced workloads, and the restrictions on how this money could be used had an end date. It is believed that during the pandemic, a lot of these executives enriched themselves in other ways through using stock options, for example, and also that they used this money differently once those restrictions end. So I advise you to look into it. There's a good article, report that was in the New York Times back in 2001 that took a look at this. Very interesting way they sum it up. They say, by this bailout, we have socialized the airline industry's expenses, but we have privatized their profits. So I'm going to put that article in the show notes. So if you're interested in taking a look at what those bailouts did and how they were used and the little bit of the scrutiny that went into them after the fact, you may be interested in that. But thank you for your email, Joel. Appreciate that. Next up, we got Chris in Florida. Chris says, "Hey, Will, it's hot as hell down here in South Florida, and I'm wondering if you're going to cover the new coolcation trend that we see." Thanks for your note, Chris. I have seen this coolcation trend. It started popping up in the media about a year ago. The premise is that typically when we think of summer vacations, we think of going somewhere nice to enjoy the sun, going to the beach, wearing less clothes, things like this. Well, now because places are becoming hotter and people are trying to escape the heat, we're seeing more people who are choosing to travel to northern destinations, for example, so they can escape the heat, beat the heat, whatever you want to say. I'm not sure there's much of a story here. It sounds like a media buzzword. The media invents these words every few years, such as forest bathing. Don't get me started on that. These words are just buzzwords. These magazines are looking to things to write about all the time. I don't know. I mean, possibly some of the surveys and the articles I read, they say more people are traveling north during the summer now. Okay, maybe they are. I'm not sure that we've kept really great data on all that, but the idea is that people are escaping the heat. I think this is something that has always happened. Chris, you're located in Florida. Any snowbirds coming down there during the summer? No, most people stay up north. They don't travel south. You might, but it's just not really that big of a story to me. I think it's more of a gimmick. So that's all we'll say about that. Let's go out to, where are we going here? Colorado. Katie in Colorado says, "Will, what do you think of the TSA removing the requirement to take off your shoes when going through security?" Well, as someone that didn't have TSA pre-check for more than 15 years of his travel career, I just got TSA pre-check last year. I have taken my shoes off hundreds of times going through security. That wasn't really the worst thing for me. Computer was always the worst for me. I traveled with a backpack typically, and a lot of times backpacks get really tight and stuffed, and you have to really order everything inside. So getting the computer out was always a little bit of an annoyance for me. I did not like that. The shoes were kind of easy. It wasn't much for me, but I am happy to see the policy end, of course. This policy was enacted in 2002, and it was in response to multiple incidences. Of course, we had September 11th in September of 2001, which put everybody on edge. Then in December, just a couple months after September 11th, we had the infamous shoe bomber incident. There was a guy by the name of Richard Reed. He was a British citizen and an Al-Qaeda sympathizer, it turns out. And he attempted to detonate explosives that were hidden in his shoes. And he tried to do this during the middle of the flight. So he got through security fine and everything. This was an American Airlines flight from Paris to Miami. And he tried to actually light a fuse to ignite his shoes. But he was stopped by passengers and crew before he was able to do so, or I'm not sure if there was some issue with the technology he was using. There's some reports that the explosive were damp, I don't know if that was because of the climate or he was trying to hide it from security. But in any case, after that incident in early 2002, the TSA started advising passengers to remove their shoes. It was less of a strict regulation and more something that was a case-by-case basis. But then by 2006, it was completely mandatory for all U.S. passengers, of course, except for the kids and seniors, to take off their shoes during the screening. So we've had almost 20 years of this, probably more than 20 years if you go back to the early days of 2002 when it first got going. So I'm very happy to see it end. I haven't seen any reports that we've prevented a lot of incidences by making people remove their shoes. I also feel like the technology has just gotten to the point where if there's a bomb in your shoe and the body scanner can't detect it, then what are we doing that for? Why are we standing in a body scanner being exposed to that technology if it can't find explosives in the shoes? It just doesn't make sense. So we need to rethink airport security in general, and I think it's a good topic for a later discussion when we have more time to really go into it. But yes, I am very excited, and if you haven't heard, going forward, you will not have to take off your shoes at airport security, TSA airport security in the States. It is being rolled out on a case-by-case basis, so in the next couple weeks or months, it is possible that your local airport may still require you to take your shoes off. By the end of the summer, it's most likely that wherever you're flying out of, you will not have to remove your shoes anymore. Had another conversation about this with someone, and they pointed out, well, what's left for TSA PreCheck then? What's the benefit? Well, there are several benefits still. You can keep your computer in the bag. You don't have to take off your belt, etc. But this is a big win for security lines because putting on and taking off shoes are no doubt one of the biggest time sucks and bottlenecks at TSA airport security. Okay, we got time for one more. Let's do one more. Let's go to Anita in Switzerland. Anita had a comment on my monologue from episode 12 when I discussed people not traveling to the United States because of Trump. She writes, I totally agree with you that it's short-sighted not to visit a country because of politics, and I've been having many conversations about that with people who criticize me for doing my U.S. trip. She recently came to the U.S. But as of right now, the reluctance is not about being unhappy with politics or with tariffs or with Trump per se. It's the deeply disturbing stories of tourists being detained at airports and the fear of being humiliated by border agents. The idea of being unwelcome and of facing disrespect. Okay, I appreciate that message, and I agree. It's horrible if people are being detained at the border unfairly and they're having trouble to go through, and that's an issue that I hope is no longer relevant. The last article I can find in the news about something like that, the majority of them are in March. I found one that was in April that seemed to be speaking about incidences earlier in the year. So the media's kind of dropped that angle. Now, does that mean it's not happening at all? Of course not. It doesn't. But I hope that issue is behind us. And I stand by my main point of my monologue, which was that we should not be using politics to judge whether or not we go to a place, because then we would never go anywhere. The travel industry would effectively shut down because no place on this earth is perfect and no place on this earth has a perfect government. But I appreciate your thoughts, Anita. Send me more articles if you find them, everyone out there. Thank you guys for the notes and emails. You can message me on Instagram at Wake and Wonder Will. You can email me will@wakeandwander.com if you want to be a part of the program next or send in your thoughts for conversation. I want to talk about today my trip to Mount Rushmore. But one more thing before we get into that. I have a movie recommendation for you guys. I just finished watching it. I did it as part of my Spanish class I'm taking, but I thought it would be really cool to share with you guys. It's called Society of the Snow. It is the story that goes back to 1972 of a Uruguayan rugby team whose plane crashed in the Andes Mountains. Many people died upon impact, but a group of people survived, and they went on to spend multiple months in the Andes during the end of winter, trying to get rescued in a variety of ways. I don't want to give away too much, but there's a couple things that really stuck out to me about this movie. First off, the filming and the scenery of it is absolutely fantastic. It's filmed in the Andes. You see the guys hiking through the Andes, these snow-covered peaks. It's just very beautiful scenery. So if you've never been to the Andes and you want a little inspiration there, not necessarily to experience the way these guys did, but just first off, beautiful scenery. The movie is in Spanish with English subtitles. I like that kind of stuff. It is a little more work to follow it because you're reading a lot, but it does make you feel a little foreign, like you're almost traveling a little bit. So instead of watching an episode of Friends, you put on something like this and it makes you feel like you're transported to a different place. It is a harrowing survival situation. So if you're into survival at all, it's interesting to see what these guys did, how they reacted, some of the strategies they tried to use, and ultimately how many of them ended up surviving, which, again, I won't talk about too much. You'll want to see it to experience it. It also stuck with me because on this program previously we had been talking about some of the plane crashes that have been in the news. And typically when you watch movies or programs that involve plane crashes, the idea of the crash is presented, but it's not often realistic. It's often like a plane crash light. Generally speaking, they're not going to show you a lot of the horror of the actual plane crash. In most cases, it's glorified. A plane crashes, slides to a halt in a field, maybe some wings break off. But this movie is very different. It is one of the most dramatic, scary, and just frightening plane crashes I have ever seen presented. We've talked a lot about these plane crashes over the last couple episodes, and I even admitted it in one of the episodes. It's easy to talk about. It's almost romanticizing it. Oh, you're on a plane crash and you get stranded in the mountains and you survive, or you're the one survivor of a plane crash. How lucky, quote unquote. We just have this idea when we talk about it. It's easy to forget what a crushing, scary experience it must be. And this movie does such a good job of portraying the plane crash as the horrific incident it is. And it's super cool. At the end, they have the real photos of the survival situation. One of the guys had a camera on him. He takes pictures of all them surviving and dying. And they ask during the movie, why is this guy taking pictures? Who are these pictures for? And that gets answered as we go through the movie, but really neat just to see these pictures from the 70s. You can see the exact replica of the way it's portrayed as compared to the pictures that were taken. So Society of the Snow, it's on Netflix. One of the most horrific examples of a plane crash I have ever seen. So check it out. All right, the curious case of Mount Rushmore. Let's get into this because we probably don't think about it that much, but Mount Rushmore is one of the most curious destinations in probably all of America. Think about it. There's nowhere else other than the Black Hills of South Dakota where you'll find 4 former presidents carved into the rock. Now, most people have no idea why Mount Rushmore was created or really anything about it. However, you will often hear it described as a, quote, national treasure. A national treasure in the hills of South Dakota. Why was it created and what is it really about? Now, admittedly, this was not my idea to go to Mount Rushmore. In fact, I've never really had a big interest in it. I'll be honest, I couldn't even name the 4 presidents that were on there. I knew a couple, but I didn't know them all. Do you? I'll give you a couple minutes. Think about, without looking it up, who are the 4 presidents at Mount Rushmore. The real reason I went is not because I had an overwhelming desire to go. I went because my mother, for years, has been telling me that going to Mount Rushmore is on her bucket list. She wanted to come out to Colorado and road trip there and make a couple days of it. So I said, okay, let's do it. So my mom and my godmother came out to Colorado, and we drove 9 hours on a Wednesday to the Black Hills of South Dakota. I know some of you East Coasters and Europeans may be shocked at that. 9 hours on the East Coast gets you from Boston south past Washington, D.C. Out here in the West, it gets you maybe one state over. A lot of driving distance out here. If you can do it in a day, it's a reasonable drive for us. And it's beautiful. No traffic. We drove north through Colorado, crossed southeast Wyoming, and then into the Black Hills and the very small town of Keystone that sits at the base of Mount Rushmore. We spent the night Wednesday night, and on Thursday morning, we went to visit the park. It's about 2 miles or so, maybe a little bit more, from Keystone to the entrance to the park. Keystone itself is nothing to write home about. It's a fine hub. They have a couple hotels. They have a couple restaurants, an old school saloon. It's a tourist town. It doesn't feel very local. That was my first impression. For example, we stayed at the Roosevelt Inn, and across the street from that is a zip line and a wood climbing course, downhill track, these kind of things, just attractions for families and kids. And then you just have a slew of restaurants that cater to tourists. But it's very convenient to stay there because you're literally 5 minutes from the entrance to Mount Rushmore. And when you're driving up the hill from Keystone to Mount Rushmore, you already get these ridiculous views of the carvings. You don't have to be in the park to see. These faces are carved into the side of a mountain. And although the terrain there can hide it at times, they are high enough where you can just be driving by on the road, and all of a sudden, there's George Washington looking at you. It's very bizarre in that way because you're used to, at least me out west, seeing the mountain faces, and sometimes we look for faces and we name mountains after things they look like. But here you're just literally seeing 4 faces. So we drive up to the park, and first thing we do is go into the movie theater to get an explanation about Mount Rushmore and why it was built and all this stuff. And I'm really interested. I'm thinking, all right, let's see what this is about. There has to be a pretty good reason and a pretty good story behind these faces being carved into the rock. And I got to tell you, I was quite stunned when in the first 30 seconds of the movie, they revealed that all of us there, every single one of us, all the thousands of people that come and visit each day, they revealed that we're all suckers. Apparently, in the 1920s, there was quite a bit of mining going on in the Black Hills area. And one businessman looked around and thought, we need more people to come to this area. How can we get more people to come to this area? And the idea they came up with was to carve big figures into the mountainside. And they thought this could be the attraction that makes people journey here to the quote-unquote middle of nowhere. Originally, they wanted to carve Western figures. So the original idea was not to carve the presidents. The original idea was to carve Western figures. What does that mean? Cowboy on a horseback, a Native American, whatever. Later, after thinking it through, they decided, some kind of ambiguous Western figure might not be enough to draw people here. Let's do presidents. And that is how the idea was born. The idea was not born out of any other reason than attracting tourists to the area. So right off the bat, they tell everyone sitting there, sorry, you're a sucker. Sorry, you came here thinking this is some iconic place with some deep history, with some story behind it. Actually, we just built this so you would come here. So congratulations, you're here. It was kind of funny. Honestly, I had to laugh. I chuckled. I thought that's good. You got us. We're here. We're here. So tell us more. Why? How did you do this? What? How did they do it? Each of the faces on the mountain are about 60 feet tall. And originally, they had planned to carve upper bodies as well. As the project went along, things changed. We'll get into that in a second. But how did they do it? All right, well, let's go back. The project started in 1927 and finished in October of 1941. So it took 14 years to create what we see today. Originally, the plan was to do the four faces with bodies and then also to put sort of a timeline up there of American history. The idea was to represent the first 150 years of United States history, which is why the specific four presidents were chosen. 14 years from 1927 to 1941, 90% of the construction or carving was done with dynamite. That was one of the coolest things to see going up there. They have a museum you can go through, and it explains how painstaking the construction was. Not only are you using highly explosive dynamite to just blast rock off the hill, but then you had people who would get into harnesses of the time, many of which was just sitting on wood logs or constructed little wood platforms, and then they would use more or less hammer guns to jackhammer type technology to carve out the individual portions of the faces. Pretty interesting the way it's done. But I was still just so stunned. I could not get over the fact that this place was specifically designed for tourists to come here. And it's ironic because the area is so beautiful. The Black Hills are absolutely stunning. They're called the Black Hills because they're heavily wooded. And when you stand at a lookout at one of these hills and look at the hills in the distance, they have a tint of looking black. And this name comes from the old Native American term for this area. It's gorgeous. And so it's ironic that these people back in the 1920s or earlier thought that they needed some phony reason for people to come here. That, to me, as an outdoorsman, is a little bit insulting because the area is so stinking beautiful. I feel like they could have had people come anyway. But I must admit, not as many people would come if it weren't the Mount Rushmore it is today. About 2.5 million people visit per year. So admittedly, that's more than people that would come to hike, but I digress there. It's just a little bit ironic. Let's get into the presidents a little bit. This part was interesting. A visit to Mount Rushmore is unlike anything else, not only because of its physical stature of the faces and just the bizarre nature of it, but because of the way the park is run. It's classified as a national memorial. I don't know how much you guys know about the national park system, but there's many different levels in it. You have your national parks, which are Grand Teton, Zion, Yosemite, the big preserved areas we think of. We also have subcategories, National Historic Landmarks, National Historic Sites. They have different classifications for what they preserve and also how much funding they get. So a national monument like Mount Rushmore protects natural, cultural, and historic features by presidential proclamation. Also the way that they're preserved matters. So this is a national memorial. When you visit a national park, a national historic park, a national historic landmark, historical sites, they all represent something having to do with America, but it's typically very hands-off. And what I mean by that is, let's say we go to Zion National Park. There's not going to be any presentation necessarily about America there. It's you're there to enjoy the landscape. Other places we go celebrate specific events. So if we go to Pearl Harbor on Oahu, we're going to learn about that incident. We're going to learn some context about what the country was doing at that time, but it's just specifically focused on that incident. Mount Rushmore is completely different. First, because it's made up. It's not a historic site really at all. Nothing happened there. Nothing we want to talk about happened there anyway. We'll get into that in a second. But there's no narrative there. So everything we're talking about is manufactured a little bit. So the way they do it is very interesting because you go there and instead of just looking at this and having it be, there's a whole program designed around national pride. The vibe there is very patriotic, much more so than any other place I've been. From the minute you get there, it's all about recognizing the history of America, the influence these particular 4 presidents had, and also to celebrate the modern day America. For example, each night they have a lighting ceremony. At dusk, you gather in the auditorium, which is set below the 4 carvings, and a park ranger comes out, gave a wonderful, motivating speech about what it meant to be American, how her family had come here, and what this country meant to her and her family. Then we sang the national anthem. I'm pretty sure we sang something like, "This land is your land, this land is my land," across the fruited plains. Then, as darkness sets in, the lights turn on and illuminate the faces on the mountainside, and everybody cheers. And then at the end, they called up all military personnel and anybody really involved in a military family to come up on the stage, and there was a ceremony to honor them. All well and good. I mean, I'm all for a little patriotism. However, I'm just pointing out to say it's different than any other place I've been, to where yes, you're going to somewhere that's kind of made up, but the idea is to go there and to pay a homage to your country, to learn a little bit about these 4 very influential presidents, to learn a little bit about the timeline these presidents represent in our country. So who are the presidents? Did you guys figure it out? First one, George Washington. He was selected, of course, because he was the first president. So in the museums, it's neat. You can learn all about the lives of these presidents. So we learn about George Washington being the first president and how he led to the creation of this country. Second president, Thomas Jefferson. This one got a little interesting. Thomas Jefferson was the 3rd president. He oversaw a lot of the Western expansion in this country. A lot of awesome stories about that. The pioneers. Thomas Jefferson is known for the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He's also known as the man who sent Lewis and Clark on their famous expedition west in the early 19th century. And those expeditions, of course, inspired generations of Americans later who went west. We think about things like the Oregon Trail, very inspirational, the movement out west. A lot of stories we can read and become inspired by that. However, a lot of this was Native American land, so we were getting involved in skirmishes, and we were taking this land in many cases from people that had been here for a lot longer. When they talk about Thomas Jefferson, they do acknowledge the fact that this was once native land, but they acknowledge it very quickly and they move on. We'll talk about that in a second because there's another site called Crazy Horse that the Native American tribe is building down there. So we'll get to that in a second. But Thomas Jefferson's up there. Third, Abraham Lincoln. Chosen for very obvious reasons, one of the most influential presidents, ended slavery, etc. I think Honest Abe needs no introduction. And the final president on there is Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. My personal favorite president. If you guys don't know, and it really has nothing to do with politics, if you guys don't know about Teddy Roosevelt's life, I really recommend looking into him. He was a voracious outdoorsman. If you have not read the book River of Doubt, which tells the story of Teddy Roosevelt going down to Brazil and rafting a unnamed, uncharted river after losing his presidential election, You really got to look into it, man. Teddy was such a character. He was a world traveler, and his journey in South America is one of the best adventure tales I have ever read. So check it out, River of Doubt. And I thought a lot about Teddy while I was there. The vibe at Mount Rushmore really encourages you to think back about the history of America, but also to think about the present. And one of the things that I couldn't get off my mind is that here is Teddy Roosevelt, this extreme outdoorsman, this lover of nature. And are there any politicians today that are even remotely outdoorsy? I can't think of one. I can't think of a national, known, high level politician in this country that lives and breathes the outdoors. I'm trying to think of one. I'm sure there are people, representatives of Congress, who enjoy the outdoors or have spoken about it in some way in terms of environmental protection, expanding the national park system. I'm sure there are those who talk about it. I'm not sure I've seen one that's just about it. And that's why Teddy is so great. When you read about his adventures, this guy, he went for it. He really did. So it was interesting to think about that while we were there. Now, the timeline that Mount Rushmore creates for you when you visit is pretty good. You get to think about these four presidents, and they do represent different points in American history, and it's a nice little refresher. Plus, you're outside. They have what they call the Presidential Trail, where you can walk from the main visitor center and get different perspectives on the faces. That is, to see them from different angles. You walk through a little bit of a forest. You visit the area where they have the original sculpture, the smaller one that they used as a model to build the bigger one on the mountain. And there are talks by park rangers to explain more about how they carved it and how it's done. So the monument itself is really well presented. The way it is framed at times is not always perfect. As I said, the Thomas Jefferson Western expansion, we glaze over a lot of the wrongdoing there. In fact, one of the things that is revealed is that the mountain that the faces were carved into was actually considered a sacred place by Native Americans. And they have a little blurb about this with a Native American talking about it, and he graciously says that while this was once a sacred site, they are happy to share it with all people. But yeah, not great. You guys may have heard of Crazy Horse, the Crazy Horse Monument. This is about 30 minutes from Mount Rushmore. And this was a project taken up by Native Americans to more or less, I guess, cash in on the idea of Mount Rushmore. Because once Mount Rushmore was completed in the 1940s, tourists started coming. All this money started flowing into this area. And of course, the Native American tribes were left on the outside looking in. So they came up with the idea to build their own memorial to their own heroes. So they built the Crazy Horse Memorial. I did get the chance to visit this as well, and I had similar feelings as I had at Mount Rushmore. While the story behind it is interesting, it is strange that the place is built 100% completely only to attract tourists. That part stuck out to me, obviously, for the whole trip, as I'm saying. That's my problem. That's not yours. But it more so stuck out at Crazy Horse because it just seemed very unlike the Native Americans to use the land that way and to try and monetize things that way. But it's understandable because all these people are coming to see Mount Rushmore. That's built on sacred land. The tribe isn't seeing any of that. This was all their land previously anyway, so it's just one of these awkward modern day situations, I guess we'll say. But they are running Crazy Horse, and the big difference between Crazy Horse and Mount Rushmore is that Crazy Horse is not finished yet. The only thing that's carved is the face of one of their historic warriors as well as his outstretched arm. but the whole design is very complex. The complete design is supposed to be the warrior riding atop a horse. And if you guys look at the picture, the concept online, you'll see it's very complex. It's going to take a really long time to finish it, if they ever finish it. Just to enter Crazy Horse Memorial was about $35 for the three of us in one car. That compared to $10 to park at Mount Rushmore. So it's significantly more expensive to go to Crazy Horse. They do have some really nice infrastructure there. The museum is state-of-the-art and beautiful and very well kept. It's obviously very new. So they've reinvested a lot of the money into the infrastructure there. The other difference between Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse is that Mount Rushmore, immediately upon entering the park, and even well before then, you are pretty close to the faces, relatively speaking. You can get a very good picture, a very good vantage point of them, very good view of them from up close, and you can take a trail to get you even closer. At Crazy Horse, it's a little different. The face is pretty far away. You can see it, of course, but it's not something where you can get a really clear picture of it from the visitor center. There are opportunities to go up on the mountain to get a closer look. However, they require extra payment, and they also require some involvement in their program. So, for example, to go up and experience the face and to stand there on the rock, I think was somewhere more than $100, maybe close to $150. Don't remember the exact price, but it was another significant investment. Now, that opportunity exists. It does not exist at Mount Rushmore. In fact, I saw many signs in and around the Mount Rushmore area saying how it was federal land and it was closed, especially around it. Because I was hoping to hike to the top. I think that'd be awesome. But it seems to be federally illegal to do so. Crazy Horse at least gives you that opportunity to go up and take a closer look, but it will cost you. But it was a great trip. It really was. And the Black Hills, if you guys, even if you're just going to drive through the area, even if you're not feeling overly patriotic, just drive through this area. You can see the faces from the road. So you don't have to go in. You don't have to deal with it. But you can check it out. And this whole area, I personally could have spent a week just exploring the Black Hills Wilderness, which I think I will do in the future. But not a lot of time on this trip. We drove 9 hours on a Wednesday. We stayed overnight. We visited Mount Rushmore and Crazy Horse on Thursday and stayed once again Thursday night in Keystone. And Friday morning, we drove 9 hours back to Western Colorado. At times, I was reminded of Brad Ryan in episode 2 of this podcast. Brad Ryan, Traveling with Your Grandmother. Very interesting conversation about what it's like to travel with people who are not only different age groups than you, but maybe different generational outlooks and just generally different than you, and how that leads to compromise and how that leads to the appreciation of different perspectives. And I could tell many times how my mother, godmother, and I, our perspectives differentiated. For example, every time I would call Mount Rushmore bizarre or weird, they would tell me to shut up. And when I took them to a picnic area to enjoy a nice, beautiful lunch, they told me that the trees were ugly and that they had gotten something on their white shirt. So, Mom and Godmother, bless you both. I had a blast. I hope you guys had fun. I learned a lot from you. It was fun. We had fun. One last thing on this. You might be wondering, why is it called Mount Rushmore? What does that name have to do with anything? In the 1800s, there was a lot of mining going on in this area. And the story is not that exciting. It was some lawyer, some prospector from the East Coast who came out. He looked at that mountain. He asked if it had a name. They said no. So he named it after himself, and the name stuck. It really isn't anything that exciting. Just named after some guy from the East Coast a long time ago. It's kind of fitting for Mount Rushmore, given that the whole thing's made up. Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. just so you guys know, we are going to have guests back on this program. We went through a good run of about 10 of them. We've had a couple solo episodes now. It's just been fun. It's fun to practice. It's fun to go through. It's fun to tackle some of this news. I will definitely be having guests back on, so worry not there. Next week, I am headed to Hawaii for about 3 weeks. I'm going to be leading a couple tours out there. If you want to get in touch with me, at Wake and Wander Will on Instagram, will@wakeandwander.com is my email. We will see you next time.
Riding the terrain, flying high up once again. Got my crew sitting healthy and my boo living wealthy. Level 99, never settle in my mind. So I pedal and I climb up the pedestal and find almighty weapon. So I calm, lightly step into the castle. Satchel, tackled, wrestled down the corridor where I'm grounded through the floor. Roundhouse into my core, down, out, and through the door. Sword down at my side, I gotta round up and ride. Face boss, break jaws till I take off. Face off, stop and swing my serious strike. This is it. Take the title, disappear in the night to the whole wide world. Got the keys to the kingdom overseas with the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world. Slay the boss in the castle when we cross final battle. Then I walk out, travel to the whole wide world. Got the keys to the kingdom overseas with the wisdom guarantee that my rhythm hit the whole wide world. Slay the boss in the castle when we